The chance to legally bet on your favorite sport online could be just around the corner for Kansans, while state lawmakers look for ways to slow down an epidemic of suspended licenses. And a fight over a proposed constitutional amendment on abortion. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. The Kansas Senate this week advanced a proposed amendment on abortion, but this was just the first step in the fight to change the state's constitution. We start with Corinne Griffith from KSN's Capitol Bureau with a look at the Senate debate.
The Senate spent nearly 5 hours today debating a proposed amendment that would change the Kansas Constitution to give the power to the legislature to regulate abortion in the state. The amendment passed the Senate 28-12. Conservative lawmakers have quickly pushed the value them both bill through to the House and Senate floor in order to get the amendment vote on the August ballot. They say it's important that Kansans have a voice on this issue.
It's incredibly important that when you're doing something as sacred as our Constitution, that you have as many people speak as possible.
Opponents of the amendment say a woman's right to an abortion should not involve the government. It should remain a discussion she has with her doctor.
The decisions that my patients make and the situations that they're in and the complexities from a medical standpoint just really cannot be understood by anyone but the patient and her doctor.
From here, the amendment proposal will be voted on by the Kansas House. If it also passes there, the amendment will be on your August ballot. At the Capitol, I'm Corinne Griffith.
Now, Governor Laura Kelly, who, by the way, has no role in the passing of an amendment to the state constitution, says this amendment would return Kansas to the dark ages, calling it a political attack on women's rights that will hurt the state's business climate. Supporters immediately fired back at the governor, who actually, again, as we said, has no role in the process of amending the state constitution. Now, joining me today on the desk to discuss this and more, we have State Representative Paul Wagner, a Hutchinson Republican, and State Representative Elizabeth Bishop, a Democrat from Wichita, and Adam Strunk, the editor of the Newton Owl. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
So this debate now headed to the House.
Yes.
Adam, before we started, I think asked the key question: does it have a chance in the House? Everyone wants to know if it's going to make it all the way to a public vote. So from what you guys are hearing, does it have a chance in the House?
Well, what I understand, the word I get is that it's likely, or at least possibly, going to be on the agenda for Wednesday. And one thing I do know about it is it's probably going to be a difficult session that day, and we're probably going to meet, recess, come back in 2 hours, meet again, recess, come back in an hour, because in between time, they're trying to count the votes and trying to, well, just to be perfectly frank, twist arms.
I'll say on my end of it, I think people are feeling, the Republicans are feeling very strongly that this will pass. Again, you have to realize for the legislators, it is not them making the decision, it's just passing it forward to the voters in August. And as far as arm twisting, we heard a lot about Governor Kelly. She's not directly involved, but we've heard a lot about Governor Kelly arm twisting, Democrats to make sure they toe the line on this issue. And but I think at the end of the day, 84 votes, I think we'll have it, but we'll find out, I guess, on Wednesday.
And this obviously is a huge issue at the State House. As we talk about voters, though, I know folks who truly care about the issue are certainly reaching out to lawmakers, but average Kansans on the street, most of the folks I've spoke with didn't even realize that this was going on. What about you, Adam?
It just depends. Letters to the editor, I've been getting a few letters to the editor. There is a fairly concerted effort as a part to lobby in favor of this from the groups that usually come out in favor of these things. Talking to some of our local legislators, they are hearing people talk about it. So there is some kind of a local knowledge. It's just, the question is, will it pass the House? And then what would that mean if that would show up on the ballot and voters would approve it?
Mm-hmm. So and a lot of questions, and that really is a lot of what was raised in the Senate debate, was questions about the wording of it and how that wording would impact state law, what it could do, what it couldn't do, and perhaps things well beyond abortion. Do you see those same issues coming up in a House debate? Paul, we'll start with you.
I imagine it'll follow somewhat the same contours, but again, you have to realize that it's strictly a question of, the goal is certainly it's a modest proposal. It's just returning to the status of abortion law that we had in 2018. I mean, this is not a big reach. In many ways, this is a very modest reach. And I think a lot of the concerns, I mean, even the discussion on your video that you just showed was kind of, it's not the whole issue of abortion, it's just a question of regulation, whether it's undue burden versus strict scrutiny. It's frankly, what's the motivation? I think it makes it much easier for people on the pro-life side to make their point.
Okay, Elizabeth?
What concerns me and I find unsettling is the way, this is a very emotional issue. It's extremely divisive. It's one of those issues that most women feel very strongly about because they have children, have perhaps had problem pregnancies, perhaps needed to make a choice. I believe about 69% of the women who do access abortion services already have children, and it's a decision they've made for themselves and their family. What I find distressing is the way that the issue of abortion has been used, in my opinion, in a highly cynical fashion. There are people that feel strongly about it on both sides, and I don't discount that. I'm hearing from both of them. My inbox is filling up. But it has been used as a wedge issue. It has been used in ways that it really shouldn't be. And it would be really nice if we could put this behind us and not have the 1, 2, 3 abortion issues every single session that takes over and we're not able to deal with what we have as a pretty heavy agenda of things that we should be working on to benefit the citizens of Kansas.
Well, it's definitely going to be interesting to hear what comes up in the debate on probably Wednesday from what we're hearing. We'll have to see what happens there, but we've got a few other things to talk about today. So we're going to move on. A lawsuit filed this week accuses the KHP of deliberately stopping cars with out-of-state plates. The lawsuit filed on behalf of 3 people, including a pair of Oklahoma brothers, says 93% of the Kansas Highway Patrol's traffic stops in 2017 involved cars with out-of-state plates. The suit contends that the KHP in particular targets out-of-state drivers on the main highway connecting Kansas and Colorado because of Colorado's marijuana laws. Out-of-state motorists on I-70 constituted 96% of all the agency's reported civil forfeitures from 2018 to 2019, according to the lawsuit. 2/3 of those motorists were either drivers of color or had passengers of color in the car. The Associated Press reports the lawsuit began as a hand-scrawled complaint filed last December by the brothers from Oklahoma. It argues that specifically targeting out-of-state drivers infringes on their constitutional protection from illegal searches and seizures. The lawsuit seeks class action status. And another aspect of that we have just learned in the last 24 hours is a third person involved in that lawsuit is actually a Wichita man who believes he was pulled over coming into Kansas out of Colorado because he had Missouri plates. It's a very interesting lawsuit. We often hear complaints about how police, law enforcement agencies choose to pull people over, but to see it come to a lawsuit, and the numbers in this case were rather outstanding, Adam?
Well, and you can talk about the numbers. I found this story very interesting, but it also has to go back to our current law, right? Our current law, it's not only a Kansas problem. We've seen these problems in Texas. We've seen these problems in other states. We have our current civil forfeiture laws create a really large financial incentive for them to sit on these highways and do drug interdiction. I mean, you find enough pot to argue that it's a distribution case, and then you can seize the vehicle. They're not run through a criminal court. It's run through a civil court process. The burden of proof is a little bit harder for those people who are having their property seized, and then that becomes a really useful budgeting tool for these departments. I mean, these departments are going to find ways to make their budgets. For like the governing bodies that oversee them, it's nice because it's not public tax dollars that are funding some of these purchases and stuff, it's these forfeitures. And so as long as we have laws on the books that create a really large incentive for that, and they put all of the local control overseeing those expenditures on a local level, as opposed to maybe possibly a state level that regulates that a little bit, we're going to see this continue.
And actually, I'm going to turn to our lawmakers here. I believe, if I remember correctly, that there is one bill, at least, proposed that would change some of the rules about what can be seized and what can't. How much of a conversation is that? Because I know criminal justice reform is an ongoing conversation at the state house. How much is this issue playing into that conversation? Do you know?
I believe there is something that will be heard by the Judiciary Committee. I can't remember the number of the bill. In fact, I'm not sure I ever saw a number for the bill. But I would just like to mention that here in this community, we have a severe methamphetamine problem. And recently, I know that there was an interdiction of an out-of-state car. I don't know if it was in the same area that the story talked about, but in the panels along the door, there was a huge amount of methamphetamine seized. And that needs to happen more often. We have got to find, most of the methamphetamine, from what I'm told, is being imported into our community from Mexico, and it's becoming cheaper and therefore more prevalent, and that's got to be stopped.
But not from Colorado.
I don't know if it came via Colorado into Kansas or not.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Just what the story references.
I couldn't swear to it either way, but that
Yeah.
we need more interdiction
For
like
sure.
that.
But to jump into it too, like there is, because of the financial benefits of some of our forfeiture laws, I'm not saying we need less interdiction. I'm saying that we might need to change the law so that these forfeiture funds go to a state level to where it's the state distributing that money as grants to law enforcement so they could purchase items to fight drug trafficking, to fight all these. I'm not saying that the interdiction is bad. What I'm saying is our current law makes it a large financial incentive for them to sit on the highways. That's why we're seeing like towns, like we have 2 towns in our county of 1,800 people and 2,000 people that have purchased drug sniffing dogs. And part of that is to participate in those interdictions. That's again dedicating resources to sitting on the highway as opposed to community policing, which I think a lot of people in Kansas favor.
When I served on the Judiciary Committee, we did hear the civil forfeiture law, and there was an audit done with results that were really terrible. There was not accountability by some of the law enforcement jurisdictions. And the main thing that we did with that, at that time at least, was to clamp down on that, to make sure that audits are done, that thorough reporting is done, that those assets that are forfeited are retained when they're supposed to be, are handled the right way. And that I know has been followed up on, and I think it still needs improvement.
Well, didn't you guys have them put all that information forward so the legislators could look at it and then reevaluate your forfeiture laws?
Exactly.
Okay.
I would also throw in that, you're just hearing the affirmative case, from the ACLU, and again, I would love to hear how the Highway Patrol Department, responds to this, and how, their sort of justification and rationale. I mean, it seemed, the statistics were, just hearing them first time, were kind of striking and seemed, pretty damning. But again, I would like to hear what the Highway Patrol has to say about this. I'm a little hard pressed to think that they're, wasting their time or trying to target certain people, but at the same point, this will play out in court, and we'll know more. And the legislature, again, the the criminal justice reform is a big issue, and I know civil forfeiture, I've heard it mentioned. I'm not on any of those committees, but is a part of that equation.
And once again, beat me to the punch on the discussion, because we have not heard the KHP side. That paperwork has not been filed. This lawsuit is just at the very beginning step, so it'll be interesting to see where it goes. All right. Well, some state lawmakers are speaking out about what some call an epidemic of suspended driver's licenses. There are some 213,000 Kansans with suspended licenses, about half of them right here in Sedgwick County. This week, lawmakers began to work a bill that might change some of that, as I showed in the story I filed with Cake News.
But it's just simple tickets, parking tickets can make you lose your license.
We first introduced you to Daniel Lawrence last October. He's had a suspended driver's license for more than a decade. He and others call the trend out of control, a national epidemic, with Kansas at the forefront.
Over 200,000 Kansans have suspended driver's licenses, and Kansas right now is kind of behind the curve on driver's license reform around the country.
Something those gathered in this committee room on Thursday are hoping to change this year.
We've been talking about suspended driver's licenses for a very long time. I would let you know, though, the problem has grown exponentially. Brought my attention to it when the Cape News story was done in October.
They were talking about a bill that would remove the extra 90 days of suspension that's currently tacked onto the penalty for someone caught driving already on a suspended license. It would also remove some of the barriers to getting a restricted license that allows folks like Daniel to drive themselves to work, school, or the doctor's office while paying off their fines and fees.
In truth, that's going to allow them to pay their rent, their bills. That will also help us as a state quit paying for all these costs that are associated with uninsured motorists who are driving on suspended licenses.
The witnesses frequently referred to the Cape News investigation.
It ran about 2 weeks from Cape News talking about the numbers of the thousands of Kansans who are in this predicament.
Even those who showed up to testify against the bill supported the general concept. Folks like Daniel just want a way to be able to pay off their fines and get back on the road.
Me and my wife just filed bankruptcy, so how can I pay $2,000 if I can't even pay all my other bills, let alone get my driver's license back?
And one point to keep in mind with all of this is that this is an ongoing thing. We have only heard from those who support the bill. They ran out of time in the hearing to hear from the opposition. Although I did speak with Ed Klump, who was the sole person signed up to speak in opposition to the bill. And he told me, representing the Sheriff's Association for Kansas and a couple of other law enforcement agency associations, that their singular opposition to the bill was that there's a technical issue with the language. They were concerned that it would then apply that to everybody with a suspended license, as opposed to those who lost their licenses because of non-payment of fines and fees, compared to those who've lost their licenses for DUIs or vehicular homicide and that sort of thing. And he wanted a clarification of the language there. Certainly something that seems to be gaining strength, and going back to the criminal justice reform, when I spoke with Gail Finney, she said that's one of the things that they're making a priority as well, as some reform in this area. Do you see, as you've been talking with fellow lawmakers, is this starting to swirl through the State House, or is this still kind of with those who are working on it right now?
I'm going to say that it does have a lot of traction. I mean, even among conservative Republicans, I mean, there's a lot of talk about criminal justice reform. You certainly don't want to have a self-defeating criminal justice system where it really locks people, you know, kind of traps them with sort of a catch-22 on things. And this suspended driver's license issue is very much, you know, that type of, or potentially, that type of situation.
That's definitely the argument.
I was surprised at the numbers from the story that I saw, and the fact that of the ones in Kansas, what was it, 300,000 or something, and about half of them were Sedgwick County. That's huge. And I like the idea of the program that the one municipal judge came up with, where he was setting aside a time to work with people that have accumulated fines and interest and penalties and so forth, and to try to stem that and help them proactively and in an interactive way. Whereas I think a lot of times these folks aren't dealing with the system timely. They're not dealing with it when they should, as they should, and it just gangs up on them, and it does become a trap. It's sort of part of the criminalization of poverty that happens so often in the criminal justice system.
I was going to say, as we went through this investigation time and time again, everybody we spoke to said it's a combination of poverty issues and lack of education. Yeah.
And going the extra mile that the municipal judge that I read about is willing to do, I think that's the way to go. And we've got to do something to get these numbers down and get people back with a valid license and insurance.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Well, I was going to ask about Harvey County, but okay then.
Well, I mean, we see a lot. I mean, I go through our blotters. Like, we see a ton of suspended licenses. Those also get involved in drug interdiction.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I mean, it's something we see quite a bit of. I mean, I think everyone would agree it's kind of hard to pay off those fines when you can't work. Exactly. You need to drive. Exactly. I mean, we're not in a society where you can just walk to work in most cases, exactly. Which is unfortunate. We could be a little more walkable, but because of that, like, people need a car, and how are you going to pay off the fines if you can't drive? I don't think a lot of these people wake up and say, I want to break the law every day. They do because they have to. And when it's paying your car fine or feeding your kids or making sure you have a roof over your head, you're going to make sure you have a roof over your head.
And part of the program is allowing for a restricted license, so it still is possible to go to work, to go to the doctor's office.
Yeah, and get those basics done. All right. Well, it's going to be interesting. They have to reschedule the hearing to hear from the opposition, and then hold their debate, and we'll have to find out but it does sound like there is an intention from the committee members I spoke with to vote this out of committee. So I'm looking forward to hearing the debate on the Senate floor, which would be the next step. All right, a couple other topics today. Kansas could soon be changing its sex crime laws, removing a loophole for spouses. Alec Gartner with KSN's Capitol Bureau explains.
Legislators are talking about getting rid of the spousal exception if the crime of sexual battery is committed. Currently, it is against the law to commit sexual battery against someone, unless you're married to them. Spouses used to have exceptions for a variety of things over the years, even rape at one time, but legislators have since changed those laws. Last year, lawmakers ran out of time to pass a bill extending the sexual battery law to married people, but it's getting an early look this session.
You unfortunately do have spouses, both male and female, who don't treat their spouses right, and there's no reason to have an exception that protects them. You shouldn't have a right to abuse your spouse just because the law says you can. I mean, you should treat your spouse better, I think, than you should anybody else, and so why have exceptions like that in the law?
The bill is likely to be voted on next week and would be up to House leadership to take it to a full vote on the floor. Reporting at the Capitol, I'm Alec Gartner.
Okay, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. They're removing some of those exceptions that were built into the law a century or more ago, kind of updating things. I have yet to speak to anybody who is against removing this exception.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, who is against this? I can't imagine anyone being against this. Like, it's bad.
A few years ago, there was this big to-do about establishing the office of the repealer in the legislature. I never heard of anything that got repealed, but this sounds to me like would be a very good law to start with, to remove the spousal exception from the sexual battery law.
Yeah, I vaguely remember the topic coming up last year. I don't know if did it make it to a floor vote or not? Or just went to committee. Okay.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, you'd really have to see exactly how the law, is laid out, and I mean, it's a sad situation where this would even come into play, but I would think it would be viewed, favorably. But again, you really have to see the details, and sometimes there are unintended consequences of doing things that you don't know until you've heard the full topic debated.
Well, I totally agree with wanting to get the full picture on something and read the full bill, which sometimes takes some doing. But I would note that there was we had to do a spousal exception for rape, for instance, and there are others, and this seems to be one that got left over, and we need to take care of it.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like last year that it didn't pass for lack of will, it passed for lack of time, I guess came up too late in the session. So not an issue this year.
I would think not.
We're barreling along, so far.
Yeah, lots of big things coming in early this year. Well, we've got one other thing that I know a lot of people have been interested in for a couple of years now, and that's sports gaming. Kansas is home to a handful of casinos, but soon gambling on your favorite sport could be at your fingertips. This week, lawmakers began to review online sports gaming rules. So what do you think? Cakes Bree Smith finds out.
Slot machines and blackjack tables, a quick way to make and sometimes even lose money.
Personally, I don't gamble a lot. I'll go and maybe spend $20. I don't care what other people want to do with their money.
Kansas is home to a handful of casinos, but soon gambling could be at your fingertips.
Well, I don't gamble per se, but I think if other markets are doing it and they regulate it right, I don't see any problem with it.
In just a few days, lawmakers in the state will review online sports gaming rules. A new bill would allow Kansans who are 21 and over to bet on sporting events anywhere from their smartphone or computer.
Do it in Vegas, why not? No, not here.
Right now, all sites and apps are blocked here in Kansas for sports gaming, and this is a message you wouldn't see if you were in some other states like Nevada. People here in Kansas say they're excited, but they still have some concerns.
How are they spending the money? Is it on credit card, or how are they doing that? And if it's on credit card and it's online, they stand a very good chance of their account being hacked and losing everything.
Gamblers are hopeful lawmakers will make the right choice for Kansans.
Then it's, as long as it's regulated right, just don't let it turn into the wild, wild west, so to speak.
I would urge them to think very carefully about the effects it will have on the people of Kansas and the families.
Certainly some of the standard concerns about gambling that go along with this bill. But I know a lot of sports fans in particular very interested in seeing this pass and move forward, because it has passed and moved forward in other states. But the interesting thing is those states have not made nearly as much money off of it as they were expecting. Does the revenue difference, the fact that it may not be as much of a revenue maker for the state, impact the chances of the bill's passage?
Well, I think basically the legislature is being dragged kicking and screaming into this whole issue. It doesn't seem to me like it's anything that anybody other than those kind of in the industry are truly in favor of. I did pull up the bill and read through it. It's, I think, 35 pages. So it is difficult to follow, and it involves online. It involves in a casino. It involves going online and playing the lottery, which those of folks that run casinos and want to do the online sports betting are opposed to. So there's, some yin and yang for that, getting that sorted out. It's not simple.
Well, I, as I've understood it, it's been somewhat of a turf battle between, the Kansas Lottery and allowing, any, out-of-state online, nexus, to actually take the bets. And again, sports gambling, I mean, you do have to realize, it does open sort of a further can of worms. I mean, you can in England, I know they bet on, who's going to win the presidential election, and you can bet on just all sorts of topics.
Well, one thing you can bet on and win on, we're out of time. Sorry, guys, happens every week. Thank you so much, Paul, Elizabeth, and Adam, for joining me. I really have enjoyed our discussion. I hope you have as well. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. We'd love to continue it online. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or KPTS Channel 8 on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. For now, have a great week.